Today we're reading from Who Were the Brothers Grimm? This is video 2 of a biography by James Reed, or a true story about another person's life. And video 1 was the introduction in chapter 1, so video 2 will be chapter 2 and chapter 3. Before we begin reading from chapter 2 and chapter 3, I have some vocabulary words for you. I have more words in this one than I had in the last one, so I'm going to say the word and then pause for a second, and if you want to read the definitions of these vocabulary words, you can pause the video to do that. Otherwise, we'll just go over them at the end. We have outsiders, nobleman, Latin, French, excelled, university, botany, literature, Friedrich Karl von Savigny. Please forgive me if you speak French and know that's probably not the way that people who speak French would say that, or German, probably German. Encouraged, discussing, version, fascinated, emphasized, manuscripts, brimming, Paris, France, assistant, accurate, discovered. I'll real quick say those again. Hopefully if you were interested in the definitions, you paused the video to read them. Discovered, accurate, assistant, Paris, France, brimming, manuscripts, emphasized, fascinated, version, discussing, encouraged, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, literature, botany, university, excelled, French, Latin, nobleman, and outsiders. And listen for these words as we read chapter 2 and chapter 3 in the book The Brothers Grimm, a biography by Avery Reed. So we're going to turn over to chapter 2 to begin our reading today. Hopefully you already watched video number 1 where we read chapter 1 and the introduction. Jacob started school right away, but Wilhelm had to be privately tutored for a year before he was ready. At their new school, the brothers felt like outsiders. They were far behind the other students, most of whom were children of noblemen. The boys' classmates made fun of them, and their teachers were not much kinder. But Jacob and Wilhelm worked hard. Each morning before school, they spent 4 hours being tutored in Latin and French. They also studied geography, natural history, and other subjects for 6 hours each day. Soon, their hard work paid off. Jacob especially excelled at his studies. By the time he graduated, he was first in his class. So they spent most of the day that they were awake studying or being tutored or at school. There is the picture of the University of Marburg, a school that you can go to after high school, and it was in the country of Germany where they lived. In the spring of 1802, Jacob was accepted at the University of Marburg. For the first time in their lives, the brothers would live apart. Marburg was a beautiful city built directly into the side of a steep hill. At the very top of the hill sat a castle, and the university was just below. Jacob decided to study law, as his father had, but he wasn't very interested in the subject. He later said that he should have chosen botany, the study of plants. Jacob spent hours wandering the hillsides around Marburg, sketching and admiring the flowers and trees. There he is drawing or sketching all the flowers and trees around his university or his college. In the fall of 1803, Wilhelm joined Jacob in Marburg. He decided to study law too. Both thought they would end up as judges like their father, Philip. But the brothers' love for literature was growing. While their classmates spent their free time drinking beer and gambling, Jacob and Wilhelm discussed books and danced and sometimes acted out plays. There they are, acting out a play. It's about to tell us which one. One of their favorites was Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. They even dressed in costumes. The brothers also loved to tell each other children's stories, myths, fables, and fairy tales. They were much poorer than their classmates. However, Wilhelm and Jacob only seriously complained when they didn't have enough money to buy books. This is a great little summary of what Aesop's fables are. If you'd like to read that, I hope that you'll pause the video and read about what Aesop's fables are. And we will move on to chapter 3 at this time, a new idea. Jacob suggested that Wilhelm take a class from his favorite professor, Friedrich Karl von Savigny. Most professors talked and expected students to write down everything without asking any questions. Professor Savigny, however, encouraged questions from his students and asked many of his own. Professor Savigny thought Jacob and Wilhelm were smart and talented. He noticed that they enjoyed discussing many of the same topics that he did, so he invited them to his house to meet other writers and thinkers. One evening, Jacob walked into the Professor Savigny's library. Every wall was covered with books. Jacob was amazed. He couldn't stop looking at all of them. His eyes landed on a volume of German songs from the Middle Ages. He took it off the shelf and began to read. He could barely understand it. The songs were written in an older version of German, so they meant the same thing, but they used different words in the older version to say the same things, because words change as time goes on. You may know words that your parents haven't heard that are just a different version of the same thing they said. It was different from the German that Jacob spoke. Still, he was fascinated by songs that emphasized German pride, culture, and history. Jacob and Wilhelm spent many evenings at Professor Savigny's home. He taught them how to study old manuscripts and to pay close attention to the details that made these historical books important. At that time, many professors taught the history of ancient Greece and Rome and thought it was more important than German history, literature, and ideas. But Savigny disagreed, and so did the Grimms. At Savigny's house, Jacob and Wilhelm met many writers and artists who also cared about German history. One was a poet named Clemens Brentano. And there's the picture of the poet who wrote poems named Clemens Brentano. He was a loud, lively man who was brimming with ideas for new projects. One of his ideas was to collect German folk songs Folk songs are old songs that people have sung for generations, like fairy tales. So maybe that's where they got their idea to write down fairy tales. They were rarely written down. Brentano was afraid that the songs were going to be forgotten. So he and another writer, Achim von Arnim, began collecting the words to old folk songs. They wanted to publish them as a book. Jacob and Wilhelm loved this idea. They were quickly becoming more interested in German literature than German law. In 1804, Savigny moved to Paris, France. So he did live in the country of Germany, but he moved to the country of France in a city called Paris. A year later, he asked Jacob to join him and work as his assistant, which is his helper. With permission from his mother, Jacob dropped out of university and set off for Paris. Savigny was studying ancient Roman law, and he asked Jacob to read many different versions of the same book to see which one was the most accurate, or the best or most correct. Many people would find this job very boring, but Jacob loved it. Jacob loved Paris too. He wrote Wilhelm many letters describing the people, the food, and even the buildings. It was the first time Jacob saw a world beyond the small towns of Germany. And there's a picture of Paris, France at the time. Brentano and Arnmann's collection of German folk songs was published the same year that Jacob moved to Paris. It is called The Boy's Magic Horn. The authors include an introduction that challenged all German writers to copy down and preserve as many folk songs as possible. The book certainly had not included them all, and Arnim and Brentano did not want any folk songs to be lost. The Grimms decided to take up the challenge. Although they lived apart, Jacob and Wilhelm wrote letters back and forth asking if the other had discovered any new stories or songs for children. The brothers were very interested in starting their own collection. And that ends chapter 3 of the book Who Were the Brothers Grimm, which is a biography written by Avery Reed. So before we end this video, we'll go over the vocabulary again and say what all it means. Outsiders are people from different places that are not treated as well as other people are treated. Outsiders. Noblemen. In places or countries that have a king or queen, the important friends and relatives of the king who are rich are called noble. Noblemen. Latin. A language that some books are written in. No one speaks it anymore in 2018, and I'm pretty sure by the 1800s, even when Jacob and Wilhelm were in school, no one was speaking it, but a lot of books and older manuscripts are written in the language of Latin. French, a language people speak in the country of France, and that is still spoken even today. Excelled, to do really well. If you excel, you usually do good really fast. University, a school you can go to after high school, can also be called college, so university and college are synonyms. Botany is the study of plants. It's what the older brother Grimm thought he should have studied because he loved drawing pictures of plants. Botany. Literature, anything to do with books, writing, or stories, which Jacob and Wilhelm both loved literature. Anything to do with writing things down or reading stories from books. Friedrich Karl von Savigny was a man who was a teacher at Marburg University in 1802. Encouraged, to say something others do is good. Encouragement makes people feel good about what they do. And their teacher, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, definitely encouraged them to ask questions and to read more literature. Discuss, or discussing, means to talk about something out loud. Version. A version is just different ways of saying the same thing. different words with the same meaning. A lot of times we have more than one version because one is older and one is newer, and the way people talk changes over time. Version. Fascinated, amazed, think something is special and worth your time and attention. Fascinated, something that really catches your attention. Emphasized, show that something is very important. Emphasized. Manuscripts, stories people wrote down before the story is put in a book. Manuscripts is when the author first wrote it down. Manuscript. Brimming means full. Paris, France. Paris is a city. France is a country. They're on the continent of Europe. Paris, France. Assistant just means helper. Assistant. Accurate means right or correct. Accurate. And discovered means find or locate. Find, locate, discover are all synonyms with one another. Discovered. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little more about the brothers Grimm and who they were, Jacob and Wilhelm, in this biography by Avery Reed, and I hope that you'll come back for video 3 to hear the next chapters.